Hi, I'm Fazia Costi, and today we are going to be talking to Ricki Light of Ricki Light Educational Advocacy. Welcome to the show, Ricki.
Thank you, Fazia. Nice to be here.
Yeah, well, so just so our listeners know, I've known you quite a few years now, and I'm always thrilled to refer clients to you, and I talk about what you do because I think what you do is a really important service. And so before we get started on some of my questions, maybe we could talk a little bit about who you are and how you got started as an advocate, an educational advocate. I mean, that's a very unique job title. So tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I feel like I've evolved into this position, but I've always been there. Um, I've been in the field of special education since the 1980s, which is a long time ago. I'm dating myself, but I was very young for when I started. Um,
You're like,
and
what, two?
I've also watched special education change over
Yes.
the years. I'm originally from Toronto, Canada. I was a special ed teacher, and my initial introduction into special ed was working in what we called a segregated setting, which meant that children who were just coming out of institutions were then either returning home or going to live, kind of boarding school type of situation. And I was teaching in those types of classes, and obviously very limiting, not really in the public's view. But my role, I was teaching high school students, was to get them out into the community, which was wonderful. The community really was our classroom. So that was probably my first step into inclusion. Um, and then after that, I went to what we were called an integrated setting, which was interesting because we had one school board in Toronto that dealt mainly with the children who were more impacted by their needs. And then we rented space from other school districts to be able to have our children in the schools, classes in the schools, but the administration was not our administration. And the population in school really did not have to have anything to do with us, especially the teachers, in including our students. So I became a very fierce advocate for getting my students into the mainstream, into the fold that was a junior high, and being able to be included in the population. And I say that because it's going to relate back to my advocacy. I was advocating for my children to be part of a population that administratively we were not part of. So I had a little bit of a dance background, and I'll just give you a very quick story, Fazia, because it's important to understand.
Sure.
It kind of helps frame where I came from. The holiday show was coming up in December, and there was a lot of hoopla about it. The music teacher, everyone was involved. And I went to the music teacher and said, well, I'd like my students to do a dance number. All, pick a funky tune and we'll go out, and I just want to be part of the program. And she kind of placated me. And then the program was printed a couple of weeks before. My kids were practicing. We had a really funky song going on, and we weren't on the program anywhere. Meanwhile, I had sent out invitations to the parents and, really built it up. And I went into her room and I said, we're not on the program. And she said, well, those kids never really do participate in our program. And this is the truth. And then I said, well, put us last. Just put us somewhere, because all these parents are coming. The kids have costumes. We're all ready. And we did. We were last. And needless to say, we got a standing ovation. The next
Wow.
year, they came to me and said, how can we include your kids in the program? Where do you want to be? First, second, third? I said, in with your choir, in with your numbers. And that's where we want to be. So that was how I started advocating for my students. I
Mhm.
subsequently moved to Los Angeles, and I was fortunate to be able to be part of the Los Angeles School District, and it's kind of a country unto itself, and had a lot of experiences there. But what I found often is when it came to IEP meetings, when it came to strategy meetings with families or school personnel, I always sat beside the parent, and whether they spoke English, Korean, Spanish, I thought I could interpret for them and help them
Right.
navigate through what was a very overwhelming process. And IEPs, as I said, I watched them evolve. So they were very different than they have become now. So anyway, I would sit beside parents and stop the people, when they were rattling on with all these different numbers and metrics and especially the psychologists, and saying what the kids couldn't do. And
Right.
I would start saying what they could, or help parents and say, wait a minute, you don't have to say yes to this, or if you say yes, this is what this means. And then I moved here to Phoenix, and started looking for a job again in a public school. And this was, 24, 25 years ago.
Right.
And I just found we were a little bit behind at that time, where we were in California. And the more I kind of thought about it, the more I thought, well, maybe I don't want to be in the school system. How can I make a difference? And I did meet a developmental pediatrician here who was about to grow his practice, and serendipity, doors open, you walk through. And my role with him was going to be a little different until one day he came and said, I've got this family, they're struggling in school. And it was very early on. And I said, I can do that. I can do, give me all the information. I can help this family. And that's how my role of advocacy grew, was just continuing to do what I always did with families, but doing it in a little bit more of an integritous way. I was no longer employed by the school district, and that was 24 years ago, and I continue to do it to this day.
Well,
I've
yeah.
just moved away from that developmental pediatric practice, which was amazing for me, only because I thought it's time for me to be out on my own. I just want to say one more thing, Fozzie. I have the mic. In LA, I had the incredible opportunity to go through some doors. Sometimes I had my arms like this. I didn't want to go through. Sometimes I was kind of invited to and reluctantly went. I did leave the classroom, which was very sad for me, but moved into more administrative roles. I was a transition specialist, so I worked with high school students, on a district level, trying to help them set up transition programs. I worked in a couple of schools, also helping students transition from school to the next phase of their life. And I was a behavior specialist, so I was one of the youngest ones on the team, had a lot of the more complicated cases that no one else wanted, but obviously worked with teams. It wasn't me. I didn't have all the answers. I turned to students. I turned to parents. I turned to school personnel, anybody that would kind of partner with me. So I really learned that partnering is important, and no one person on that team has all the answers. Instead, as a team, we work it through, we come up with solutions. Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing about education is you can't do anything completely by yourself. And I think that willingness of, teachers and administrators and parents to be working together, I think that's how you meet that child's need. And I think, although I think it's a little unfortunate that they need your job, I think it's a really good thing that you're there. And I think parents are very grateful that they can get somebody who can translate for them. What does the school mean by saying this or this or this?
Mhm.
And I think it's really important that they have somebody that they can, pretty much stand behind them and say, you got this. I'm here to support you. I'm here to help you navigate this. I'm here to explain things when you don't understand. And I think that that's something that brings parents a lot of peace. So many times you go into the educational realm, and most people aren't experts in education, so they have to trust whatever the administrators and teachers tell them, but they don't really understand it fully. And so it's nice to have you there to kind of explain that process and what things mean. And I know that education's changed a lot in the last 20, 30 years, especially special ed.
Mhm.
So if somebody was looking for an advocate today for their child, what type of scenario would necessitate an advocate, and what are the things that a parent should look for when they're hiring an advocate? Because not all advocates are created equal. I think you stand out because well, one, I think you really genuinely care about your students, and two, I think you have a very good extensive knowledge of the educational system. Um, so tell me a little bit about that. What would
Yeah.
a parent look for?
Well, I think first and foremost, somebody who will hear you. As a parent, a parent's perspective on a child sometimes can be very different from what's happening in school. And I have a lot of clients who over the years, when we sat at meeting, parents are like, are you talking about my child both, one way or the other? So we have to understand that the demands of school are so different from what happens in the home. The main thing to look for is really someone who will listen, someone who will hear, neutrality.
Mhm.
I've had families come to me who have worked with other people who are phenomenal, who have their own children who have needs or, for whatever reason have come into the field. And I'm not saying these people aren't smart and knowledgeable, but sometimes these people come with an agenda. I got
Right.
this and this and this, therefore you need to get it. And what I really try and do to the best of my ability is to listen to parents, read through the evaluations, any documentation they give. And when I go to the meetings, and I'm coming back to me because I can only talk about what I do, I listen to what school personnel are saying also
Mhm.
and try to weigh that in. And I always do try and keep my focus on the child. Sometimes parents want some things to happen that may or may not be realistic in a school setting. Sometimes schools want things to happen, at home that may or may not be realistic
Right.
expectations. But in the end, I really think people should look for someone who's willing to listen, willing to understand the facts, the information, and then willing to partner with the team, not fight. I never use the word fight and win, and I never use that language, but really partner, collaborate, discuss. And one of my favorite phrases was something I learned from a friend a colleague in LA, is in what way can so and so do this? How would it look if so and so did that in your classroom? Given that so and so should be doing this, what might that look like? And I think that when you come with that type of language, it number one puts the school team at ease, and number two, people start thinking more creatively about how
Right.
can we have this instead of no, this will never happen, this can't happen, it's just not,
Yeah.
it's impossible, to I never thought about that. Or, and I also try to the best of my ability, I don't know every classroom, I don't know every school, I never profess to. um, every single situation is different, every single child is different, um, and and the culture in the classroom is different.
Right.
So looking at it really creatively, how can this happen in your room for this child? And we're not saying tomorrow, we're saying, like, how can we incrementally get that child to be closer to the goal of X? um, what would that look like? And definitely using peers in the classroom, definitely using, those resources, and sometimes, Fazia, using other people in the school, who
Right.
might have a different perspective or more expertise in that particular field. But the one thing I want to get back to, what you said, I think you need an advocate who will sit beside you as a parent and just be on that side of the table beside you. I always say to the parents, I'm kind of training them to be their own advocate, but having
Right.
somebody there makes sometimes such a big difference.
I like how you said that you're training the parent because you can't always be there.
Mm-mm.
You really can't always be there. And so the parent has to learn how to, you know, navigate the system and advocate for their child in a way that they're going to get what they need. Because sometimes I notice when parents get that initial notice from the school, it shocks them a little bit, and they almost get into this fight or flight mode, right? Do I need to switch schools, or do I go in, and really, fight back with the school? And I think when you come in, it kind of calms it down,
Mhm.
takes that fight or flight out, and they become more in that mindset of negotiating and problem solving. And I think that is the biggest thing you offer them, is that calming them down, calming the school down. It's like, no, we're here to actually resolve the issue.
Mhm.
We really genuinely want what's best for the student. And we're not ignoring the fact that you as parents and you as administrators have needs as well.
Right. No, absolutely. You
Yeah.
summarized it really well. And I also think that from my perspective, having worked in a developmental pediatric practice, which is unique, you don't bring your children in if
Right.
they have a sore throat or an earache. You bring them in if there's some type of concern. I had the good fortune of being able to, once parents had kind of gone through the assessments, got those very difficult diagnoses
Right.
sometimes, to be able to sit with them in a calm environment and say your child is the same child he or she was the day before the environment. I'm sorry, before the evaluation. Let's talk about what this means, all this paperwork, all these
Right.
phrases, all these terms. And when they realize, like when we kind of go through it, and I'll ask, does your child do this? Does your child, do you ever see that? And they're like, yes, yes. And they're shocked that I know. And I'm like, I only know because that's what you've said. That's what this means. That's what that means, to go through the metrics with them, the assessments with them, and say, it's not anything that you didn't know. This you knew. It's just
Right.
that now we understand it in a little bit. We've got a little bit more of a framework. And it doesn't mean that your child, this is, the dead end, you're not going anywhere. We're going to move like you do every day, one step at a time. And we're going to move closer. And I ask the parents, what are your dreams for your child? What do you hope for the future? And I note that. And most parents have the same dreams, the same future. And then I kind of tell them my dream is that their children will be out in society working at something that's meaningful and enjoyable to them, and supporting me when I get older in my social security. So, that's just selfishly a goal. But what parent doesn't want their child to be more independent, leading a productive life, happy, um, and whatever that looks like in a realistic world
For
for
them.
that particular child. So,
What
um,
advice would you give a parent who can't afford you? That they get this information, and right now money's tight for a lot of families.
yes.
And what if they call you, and they need your services, but they can't afford you? What advice would you give somebody like that today? If they were listening to this podcast, what would you tell them?
So um, I always try and help them to the best of my ability. I also have to honor that this is, how I put food on my table. So I'm aware of that. But what I do say to parents is I will listen, and I often will give them a pathway.
Okay.
I'm often willing to do that. Sometimes and when I'm able, I'm willing to be fair with them and try and work with them, because I hate, and I can't even say I've done it, to turn anybody really away because of
Right.
cost and things like that. And so I'm always willing at least to put them on a path and say, check back in with me, let me know. I know in Arizona, we have Raising Special Kids, which is through the Department of Education, through special ed. There is a free advocacy service. So I will say to them, here's what I'm telling you to do. Here's what the letter should look like, or, what your next steps, here's what you should ask for. Try it. And or if you need some support, contact Raising Special Kids and see if they can do it, because I know sometimes they'll go to the IEP. And there's been many times where I've helped parents through the process, at least got them set up and moving forward.
Right.
Yeah, so, and
And I think it's nice that that's available, and that you're willing to at least give them that as an alternative path. But I think if you genuinely have a child who is struggling and they need that IEP, or they need those supports in place,
I'll
I
help them.
think it's money well spent to hire an advocate to go in and sit with you, explain the process, explain the school system to you, and just really help you navigate that. Even if it's just 1 or 2 meetings, I think it makes a huge difference for parents. How often do you go in when you're working with the client, how many times do you see them?
So I do an initial intake, which, usually takes about an hour and a half just to kind of do the history, go back over things. But the history is important to me. But what I'm really looking for is, who's that child now? What are the concerns now? What are the strengths? I always start, or I always try and start, sometimes parents have me have this interview and they just start with the negative. I'm like, well, we'll get to the challenges. We'll get to the concerns. Let's start about, like, what do you love about your child? What are his, your child's strengths, and things that your child loves to do, and things that bring your child pleasure. And we start on that because I think that that's a part that gets lost.
Mhm.
Because this is usually a problem that needs to be
Right.
solved. Um, and then usually before we actually meet, I will ask parents to send me the most recent um, information from school assessments, from outside therapists,
You're
from
right. Sometimes they have multiple. They have, my
right.
kids
And I've
have
had
three
parents bring me,
assessments. Yeah.
yeah, I've had doorsteps, I call them, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to even look at that, because that was then. I need to look at now. We need to work from where we are. I can't ever go back. I can only work from where we are now and move forward. So I'll usually do that back reading before, and sometimes that back reading can take me hours, because I don't just glance through it. I really process it and try and
Right.
understand it, see patterns, see see what I can in that, get what I can. But then I also understand that some assessments are done. It's a day in a life. A good day, a bad day, a hungry day, a miserable day, a fun day, and I don't
Right.
make
It's
those
nothing more than
assessments.
an assessment. It's just,
Exactly. It's a day in
yeah.
a life. Sometimes it does give us some very strong indicators of processing and things like that. And other times it might just be a reflection of what was going on in that moment. That's why I like to speak to parents. And then after that, if the parents want, I'll usually do a quick follow-up to them, just kind of summarizing and offer a couple of suggestions. And if they want, I'm then willing to go to a school meeting. What I do find, Fazia, is that the school meetings are more productive, some generally, than they were in the past. I can't tell you the number of times, and I'm not saying it's because I'm amazing or incredible. Parents have said to me, wow, that meeting sounded so different than the other meetings.
I think schools take the meeting more seriously when an advocate shows up. I
Mhm.
think it tells them the parent is really serious about whatever they want, and that they're not only coming to that meeting to discuss what they want to discuss, but they've brought another party in as another set of ears to help them navigate the situation.
Yeah.
And I think schools take note, which is one of the biggest reasons why I advocate for advocates. I think, I tell most of my students, if they have to go in, if if you have to go into a school, into one of those meetings, and you're not getting what you want, bring an advocate with you.
Yeah.
These days, I think more and more students are getting what they want in their IEPs and their 504s, but sometimes they struggle. Sometimes schools really push back. And I think those are the cases where you really need to bring an advocate in.
Yeah, and I always help the parent understand, the IDEA or the Rehabilitation Act, so that they understand what is possible, and sometimes why schools' hands are tied.
Mhm.
Because I've watched, like I said, the iteration of the IEP from kind of, just give them to Mrs. Light. She's at the end of the hall. She'll lock the door. They'll have a great time in there, but you never have to worry about them again. To no, if you're going to give them to Mrs. Light, you better have a really good reason, and you had better try everything in your Mary Poppins bag to meet that child's needs in the general ed classroom. And that's literally what's happened with IEP. So sometimes schools have an obligation, well, they all do. Public schools have an obligation to do whatever they can before they look at bringing in special education and possibly separation, or doing specialized instruction. I also try and help clarify for parents the difference between a 504 accommodation plan and what that looks like, and what can be written into a 504 plan, and an IEP.
Well, let's talk about that for a
Okay.
minute. What is the difference between an IEP and a 504 plan so that
Okay.
our listeners can really have a good feel for what the difference is.
Okay, so a 504 accommodation plan is linked, there are two different laws under two different federal umbrellas. The 504 is the Office of Civil Rights. It's through, and anybody, by the way, who's working for any kind of public or large company can have a 504 plan. That's an accommodation saying that's got accommodation saying this person is capable of being in school, being with everybody else, or being on the job, being with everybody else. We just need to do a few things to kind of, I hate to say it, but level the playing field, or I think it's just easier to say like build the ramp so that we can get you in and make sure that you're doing it. So 504 plans have accommodations in them, things that maybe you need to do just to make sure that child's needs are being met within the general education classroom. It's a
Can you
general
give us
education
an
concept.
example of an accommodation that would be in a 504?
One that we see a lot is preferential seating. So it used to be in the front row, but for some students, the front row is the worst row to sit in. So, we might say that child, I'll say to them, and also I just want to say one more thing. I'll also involve the child in the conversation if that child's able, and also, especially older children,
Absolutely.
where should you be sitting? Is it easier for you to sit in the front? And I've had kids say to me, in high school, if I sit in the front, I feel like everybody sees me. I need to sit off to the side, or I need to get up, or I can't have anybody beside me. I need a bigger
Right.
space. So those are all.
Or if I sit in the back, I can stand up and nobody sees it.
Right. Or if I sit in the back, I can see everything that's going on, but I don't feel like there's anyone behind me. So there's a lot of preferential seating. When I see it written on an IEP, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, we have to define it. Another basic accommodation could be shortening assignments once they show mastery. Why I always go back to when people used to write the lines, I will not talk, I will not talk. It didn't, by the end, it didn't mean anything. They had no idea what they were writing. They were just writing words. So I'm just saying that you have to look at what does that child need, and maybe repeating 25 math problems doesn't actually solidify the concept. When they did the first 4 and they did really well on them, after that, it's like they're not even focusing. Or take some from different parts of the page and show different, skill levels. And those are really basic ones. We can have other ones where if there's long, they give you those long-term assignments you do over 2 weeks. And invariably, a lot of my clients Thursday night have nothing to start doing.
Unfortunately, that's more of a normal student
Yeah,
problem.
So I'll say, rather than they'll write chunking, I'm like, no chunking. That's a weird word. Break down the assignments with specific due dates, teacher checks to make sure that that child is doing what is supposed to be done on each of the due dates. And so we can see progress. So Thursday night, you write your final draft and you hand it in Friday. So those are just some accommodations. The one thing parents don't know, but it is in the law, 504s can include specialized instruction. And I know everyone's going to go, what? No special ed. It can include social skills groups. It can include anything. And the law does say for education, for 504 education, and specialized instruction and support. So that's an important thing to know. However, here's the difference. 504 should have some type, and I failed to say what a 504 is usually written for, because the definition now has broadened. It's any type of medical situation where it's affecting your ability to sustain focus, to remain alert, to concentrate in school. So it can be something like diabetes. If you have diabetes, you're waxing and waning throughout the day, you're not always able to focus. It can be a learning disability, but that isn't so great that you need specialized instruction, which would be an IEP. But you might need it to look a little different. You might need it repeated. so it can be anything like that too, you know, ADHD, executive functioning challenges, planning, organizing, shifting, sustaining attention. It can be any of those. And so you do need some assessments, some background to be able to say, hey, there is a condition, and in order to meet that condition, we need to put some accommodations in. An IEP is a long process. So I want parents to know that when you want an IEP or think your child needs an IEP, there is a set of process, there's just a set of things that need to be done to get there. Number one, you convene a review of existing data meeting where the team comes together and whatever information you bring in as a parent from the outside, and they go over, you know, how the child's doing in class, and you decide as a team, do we have enough information to say this child meets eligibility? And by the way, eligibility is defined in the Individuals with Disability Education Act, IDEA. And it's specific of what these different eligibilities are. Most of the time, the answer is no, unless there's been an outside evaluation that's been very extensive. Most of the time, and even if there has been, school often will say, well, we want to do some of our own assessments with our staff here, get their feedback, which I think is very important, by the way. And so that if they agree to do the assessments, so that's meeting number one, the review of existing data meeting. Number two is, and at that meeting, if they agree to move forward with the assessment, parents will sign an assessment plan. So they will give permission to conduct this evaluation.
So at that point, the school psychologist can do their evaluation, the teacher.
Right, or the speech therapist, OT,
right.
PT, special ed teacher, teachers, everybody, parents, they're all involved in this assessment, and they have 66 calendar days to complete it. Calendar days, weekends count, and so do school holidays, to reconvene as a team and go over the results of the assessment and say, do we have enough information now? Is the child eligible, you know, according to all this information we have? And if so, the next meeting, often it's another meeting, because that you can imagine going over data is a long meeting. Then we will meet to write the IEP, the individual education plan or program. So their parents can expect, if they're moving forward with an IEP evaluation, at least 2 meetings, and 3 if they're eligible.
Wow.
So
and
it's
then
a long
once
process. It can take 90 days.
So tell us a little bit about what type of accommodation someone would have on an IEP.
Well, and so by the way, some of my clients come in either with a 504, or in the interim, things are really starting to fall apart. I will say, let's write a 504 in the interim. So at least there's some supports there, some accommodations. And then once the IEP, if that child is found eligible, once the IEP is written, the accommodations will move over into the IEP. And again, there's lists, if you Google it, there's like hundreds of IEP accommodations. Does every child need hundreds? Absolutely not. And that's where we sit down and look at the special. And the other thing I want to say about an IEP, if an IEP is written, we identify areas of strength, we identify areas of need, and we write goals, not to meet every single need, because then they would be 40 pages long, but to meet the big needs so that we can probably eventually encompass those other needs. Then measurable goals are written, and parents need to be very aware that the goals need to be specific, they need to be measurable, and they need to have baseline. So just for an example, if your child needs to learn how to count to 10, and we need to say, how many times will we do that before we know that he or she do that, before we know that that child has mastered that goal? So that needs to be in the goal. And how many times right now is your child counting to 10, or how far? That's the baseline. So right now, if your child's counting only to 2, I know we have to work on counting from 2 forward. If I don't put any baseline data, how do I know if the goal's been
they're
achieved?
improving? Yeah.
Right. And I mean, my husband and I go on trips. He's the navigator, I'm the driver. sometimes the driver doesn't listen to the navigator, which is usually a mistake. But he always says to me, you need to know where you are to know where you're going. Because often
Yes.
I'm like, I don't know where I am. Just tell me where to go. So that's what I always think about with goals. I need to know where you are. So I can figure out where we go next. And then, and like I said, then the accommodations come in, and then they actually provide what we call specialized instruction. So it's saying an IEP is warranted if that child is sitting in the first grade math and is not picking up the concepts with everybody else. And we've tried some intervention because there is tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 general education support that's available. That should be, small group or reteaching or teaching it a little different way. And if none of that is working for the child, then we look at a specialized instruction. Can I tell you one more thing, or am I?
Sure, keep going.
So the specially designed instruction, SDI, because we love acronyms in special ed.
I love it.
The specially designed instruction is not the same, should not be the same as they've been doing in general ed. That's not working. If they're doing the full program in general ed, then they need to try the green program or the red program, because we've already understood that the initial program isn't working. It's not working. So that's sometimes what I've seen schools do, is just go to Mrs. Jones or Mr. Smith, and he'll do the same program. And for some kids, doing it slowly, repeating, for some kids it works. But if they really need specially designed instruction, that means teaching it a different way. And then finally, there's time written into the IEP that says how much time will we devote to each goal with that specially designed instruction. In other words, how much time might that child be out of the general ed room receiving that instruction, or if it's given in the general ed classroom, what would that look like, and how much time per week, per day, per month will be devoted to that.
I really appreciate how you went into detail on the 504 and, the IEP, because I think a lot of parents, until they have to go through that process, they're really not aware of it. So it's just, it's an overwhelming process when they have to go through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where you come in and you make it a little bit easier for them. But I think it's really nice that you broke it down so that our listeners can maybe take a listen to this podcast before they call an advocate.
Yeah.
And hopefully have a little bit more under their belt, before they have to go into a school meeting. Yeah, this has been amazing. I really appreciate this. So if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, they could go to RickiLightAdvocacy.com. And I don't have your phone number in front of me. What is a phone number they can call if they just want to call and get a hold of you?
I would say it's better to send me an email.
Okay, so go to RickiLightAdvocacy.com, send Ricki an email, and she will get back to you, and you guys can discuss whether she's the right fit for you, or if you even need her services. But I've been referring to Ricki for a while now, for several years, and I think she's fantastic. So
and reverse too. I often refer clients to you, Fazia, for that executive functioning piece.
Thank you.
I just feel like I'm not doing it because you're doing it to me. I'm doing it genuinely.
Oh, I know. You're a very genuine person. I appreciate that about you.
When parents, and look, one of my own children used to say to me, "Mom, be my mom, not my teacher." I think we have to, sometimes we want to wear every single hat as parents. We want to do everything we can, but sometimes there's a role for someone else.
Right.
If not, and Fazia, I know you do this, if not to work directly with that child, because sometimes it's more difficult to work with the children. They're young, they don't get it. Then to work with the parent, coaching the parent on how to, navigate the situation with the child. I think you also provide a very valuable resource for families.
Yeah, absolutely. I have students that, sometimes I just can't work with them.
Mm-hmm.
They're either too young or they're just not able to understand what we're doing. And so that's when I take the parent in and I say, okay, I'm going to teach you how to do my job.
Yeah.
And then you can do it with your child, and it works so much better. And I think like you, my goal is just to help people. I really genuinely want to help people. I had a student ask me one time, why do you care? I said, because I have to share a planet with you. And I
Yes.
would rather you were happy than upset. And I would
Yep.
rather that you were capable than not. So, I just really like seeing people improve and be happy and make the life that they have the best one possible. So I really appreciate the level of information that you gave for our listeners. And once again, if you'd like to reach out to Ricki, you can go to RickiLightAdvocacy.com. You can send her an email. And all this information will also be on our YouTube channel. So if you'd like to see the actual interview, you can go there. And I just want to thank our listeners. Without you, this would not be possible. So, and if you'd like to reach out to me, go to executivefunctioncoachaz.com, or you can go to 54mediagroup.com. And if you'd like to participate in our magazine as far as reading it, you can go to executivefunctionmagazine.com, or you can go reach out through our app on the App Store. It's Executive Function Magazine. So we would love to have you read our magazine, and we would love to have you listen to our podcast. So once again, thank you, and we'll see you next time.